Andrew Jones, thank you for making the time to see us. We're only a few days before an election. And it'd be nice to just talk about the sort of the general picture, if you like, with the Conservatives and campaigning, and also then sort of move on to the local picture,
Sure.
if you like. I know we're absolutely bombarded, aren't we, with news at the moment, but it's whether there's the sort of take-up of it. I know the message from Rishi Sunak is that the plan's working and we need to keep going. Could you just expand a bit more on what he means on that?
Yeah, sure. Basically, our country, and indeed all countries, have really been through the ringer over the past few years. We had COVID, a global pandemic, and straight after that we went into all of the turmoil caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That sent energy prices and food prices really spiking high. And the consequences for the economy have been very profound. So if you look at the amount of money that the government spent on COVID support and on energy support, that's north of £500 billion. So that is an enormous amount of money, and that's changed things. But we've got through it. We've got inflation back to normal. We've seen some real positive things develop as well during the course of the pandemic. For example, UK exports. We have grown our market share of global exports. We've seen more companies founded. There are now 1 million more companies in the UK than there were in 2010. To localise that a little bit, 2022 saw more companies founded in North Yorkshire than at any point in our county's history. So we've got through this, and we've got through it stronger than other comparable economies, and you can see that in unemployment being low and in the fact that companies are being formed and that exports are growing and that we have the fastest growth of any major economy so far this year.
And when you look at the bigger picture, I know the media talks a lot about what Rishi Sunak, said he set out to do, and there's a little bit of a hyper focus on immigration. And I'm not for 1 minute saying that immigration control isn't important, but do you think he gets a fair coverage, if you like, on the things that you mentioned about the economy? It almost seems to be mentioned in passing, the other longer term benefits, I suppose.
Well, I think the economy hasn't had as much focus as it could have had within this election. I think it is absolutely the central issue, because we have been through all of the turbulence we were just talking about, but we've got through it, and we now have an opportunity, a platform, which we can then exploit. So I would certainly be placing the economy as the central fact, the central issue of the election. You mentioned immigration. I think it's fairly widely held view that immigration has been very high and people want to see it come down, and that is both legal and illegal. Legal obviously being the safe routes that have come here, and many hundreds of thousands of people have come here, and it's high for a couple of reasons particularly. We've seen such global security issues that we have had people displaced from Afghanistan and Ukraine, and we have welcomed them here. We have a strong record of asylum in the UK. It's something I think we should be proud of, but those numbers are one-off numbers. They're not perpetual numbers. The illegal immigration is effectively the small boats crossing the channel. People want to see that stopped, and it's a very difficult thing to stop because it's to do with organised crime. It's people coming from all over the world trying to get into the UK. The numbers are down, but people want to see that significantly go much further.
And there are lots of issues. I think people generally sort of reflect on things that impact themselves sort of now. And I guess if you're on the south coast, and you're in one of those sort of seaside villages, then you're going to see that every day. But coming to Harrogate, I suppose we're seeing the more general ones of like cost of living, and NHS waiting times then as well. Where would we see that going then if the Conservatives were to get back into government on Thursday?
Well, the cost of living, let's take the two issues separately. We'll take the cost of living first. There will be a complete focus, as there has been, on bringing inflation down. Inflation is an absolute curse within an economy. It kills savings, it deters investment, and it means that people are really struggling to make ends meet at the end of a month. So the last thing we want is a return to inflation. So discipline is required. And one thing that we haven't ever had really from the Labour Party has been spending discipline. So inflation at the heart of it. The NHS is a real challenge because we have got a quite large waiting list across our country. It is interesting actually to see the points of comparison between England and Wales or England and Scotland. We have the same NHS, but in Scotland it's run by the SNP and in Labour run Wales. And you can see actually that the NHS performance in England has been better than those two countries. However, there is still a lot to be done. Now, we have seen hugely increased investment. When I became an MP in 2010, the budget was £130 billion a year. Now it is £180 billion a year, a huge increase, the greatest in NHS history. We've also seen many more doctors and nurses. There are now 45,000 more doctors, 75,000 more nurses, and we have the first ever long-term workforce plan to train up the workforce that we need for the NHS. So our challenge now is to make sure that workforce plan is developing the people we need, nurturing the people we need. The doctors' strike, I think, has been highly regrettable. Obviously, I'm not close to what's going on behind the scenes here, but I hope the doctors are going to get a good pay rise, particularly when they start off their career, though I think it is also fair to say 35% is a little bit giddy. In an era of to inflation, 35% seems out of proportion. But let's hope everybody gets around the table and gets that resolved as quickly as possible.
Do you think people's... I'm not saying people shouldn't get seen, but do you think people's expectations of what they want from the NHS as you know, I suppose in technology terms, you know, what the NHS delivers? I think we all see TV programmes, don't we, with, you know, this fantastic state-of-the-art treatment. But it's expensive, isn't it? Of what is delivered. And is that, am I right in thinking that is that the single biggest budget that the government spends on the NHS?
The budget, the largest budget goes on the workforce. It's a people budget, actually. So about 3/4 of NHS budgets go on paying salaries for doctors, nurses, midwives, and all the technicians that support everything. So, but yes, you're right. Medical advances are fantastic, but they're not cheap. Equally, we want them. Let's face it, if you have an opportunity to have your life improved or your condition cured or your life lengthened by new treatments, you want them. Of course you do.
I think you want unlimited budgets to make you know, better and happier and live longer, isn't it? I suppose.
It's quite a challenge to do that, obviously. But I think the advances that we've seen in medicine are absolutely inspiring, and medical science is brilliant. We've seen examples such as the way that a vaccine was developed for COVID very rapidly, and that will open the doors for future vaccine developments in other areas. But only in the news this last few weeks has been somebody who's had one injection, and it cost £2.5 million, and it was to tackle a blood condition. But that £2.5 million sounds extraordinary, but actually it will last for many years, and it's better value because of the cost of the annual treatment is less than the aggregate of this new treatment. So it's remarkable. The numbers sound extraordinary, but this is a life transformed, and it will open up opportunities for other people to have their lives transformed. So I love the world of medical research. I think it is a fantastic thing, and the UK is at the cutting edge of it. You know, we have a great life sciences sector.
And just moving on then to, you know, social care is a big thing, and everyone's, you know, had people that need to be, you know, cared for in some ways. But I think it's fairly acknowledged, isn't it, that the costs of social care is absolutely ballooning at the moment.
Yes. Speaking with our council, they say that the cost of adult social care and the cost of special educational needs have both been growing very rapidly and are placing them under intense pressure. In support of that, the government has said that we will be making £8.6 billion available over just 2 years. That's money that will go out to councils to help them meet the obligations they have, and also to help smooth discharge from hospitals, because that has been a blockage. And merging health and social care, as we have seen, now it's called the Department for Health and Social Care in Whitehall. We've seen the integrated care boards, where the key word there is integrated, where we've brought the two together. This is all about making the system work much more effectively by ultimately bringing it all into one group.
Do you think there's been a little bit of a, if you like, when your back's against the wall, you've just got to kind of knuckle down and, like say, if you look at the ambulance service and A&E, well, ambulance service will say, well, we actually sit outside A&Es waiting to drop patients off when we could be, dealing with other critical patients. Has there been a little bit of a lack of, I suppose to use the cliche, more helicopter sort of view, taking that holistic view across the whole service? I know the hospitals have, with sort of A&E waiting times, they've looked at what is genuinely an emergency, what could go, to the chemist or your GP or the out of hours doctors. But is that something that the view needs to happen that bit more?
Well, they have a triage system when you go into A&E, and often they have now general practitioners in A&E to help say you go this route or you go down this route. In terms of people having their back to the wall, I think actually our NHS has performed remarkably well and really tough conditions. It faced the greatest health emergency in a century, and I would say that if you have your back to the wall, there could be no greater definition of having your back to the wall than that. In terms of the ambulances, well, there's no question that in some areas that has been a real problem, but it is actually only 10% of trusts account for over half of the delays for ambulances. So that suggests that we should be focusing our resource, energy, on solving the local problem, because it's a local problem by definition. Here we have had periods where our hospital has been extremely busy, but we've also had periods where we've been able to take in ambulances from York. This is quite a regular feature, it's been happening for quite some time, but that of course is the benefit of having an integrated and one system. If the system is under pressure in one area, then another part of the area can help deal with the problem. So I look at our hospital with a degree of absolute confidence. And there's one other thing here, if I may, just quickly, Tim.
Yeah.
We're seeing now a very interesting building development taking place at the hospital. The old therapy suite, which was one of the older parts of the complex, and also full of asbestos and rack, the sort of crumbly concrete.
Yeah.
That is now being demolished, and as we speak, I think there are builders on site demolishing it. Later this year, we will therefore start the construction of 2 new operating theatres and a new day case ward. That will allow about 2,700 treatments extra per year at our hospital. So that's the sort of thing when I'm saying we've been through a lot. We've got to have a platform. We have a platform economically, a platform with health.
Yeah.
A platform with skills in our economy, as Harrogate College is about to be rebuilt. As a platform from having secured the bathing water status for the River Nid. That now has water testing taking place daily by the Environment Agency, and they have to bring forward a plan to improve water all the way through the catchment. So these are really positive developments that we can now build upon. That, I think, is our opportunity for the next few years.
And just talking about Harrogate Hospital, something that I notice, there's often the bigger news item, the national news item, but it doesn't always apply to Harrogate Hospital. So I think it's very easy to look at your daily paper, if you like, or daily news, and sort of think, well, that applies to Harrogate Hospital, and it doesn't. But I think what you're talking about is sort of building the foundations for going forward. And I think one of the things that people have got concerned about, and I know this is part of a committee I think that you're part of, is around, I'm not sure whether you call it conduct at Westminster, right. how MPs go on, and there's been things that have come up across all parties that have not reflected well on what they should be doing.
Well, I think you're being far too polite. I think we have got a major problem with standards in public life. If you go back to the last general election, the main figures were Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn and Nicola Sturgeon, all of whom have had spectacular falls from grace. We have seen throughout this Parliament people from both sides of all sides out from and causing by-elections caused by bad behaviour. Since I became an MP, 2010 that is, I have seen 8 current or former Labour MPs given custodial sentences, 2 Conservatives, one Liberal Democrat and one Scottish Nationalist. The Scottish Nationalists are having their national accounts investigated by the Scottish Police. That record is shameful, so I think there is a real problem with standards in public life. And in this election, which hasn't really caught fire, I don't think it's captured people. I think people are just weary of politics. One thing that has really cut through has been political betting. And quite frankly, it's wrong and it should be banned.
On the betting scandal, I think most people are kind of confused by it because unless they're betting tens of thousands, these are generally people that are not badly off, are they? So are they doing it for fun or just that's what they do? I think that's what confuses a lot of people with where they come from. They're not doing it for financial gain.
Well, I think it is for financial gain, but I think some of the monies some we're talking about have not been so material that they're in any way life-changing. But I think even whether the sum is small or large, if you are betting on something and you have inside knowledge on what is going on in the subject that you're betting on, you have an unfair advantage over the public. And that is wrong. That is why I think this should be banned. Irrespective of the sum of money, I don't think that's the point. I think it is a principal point about inside knowledge.
And we need to build that trust, don't we, in what
good point.
In what MPs are doing for us. And then I think there's this sort of tendency, if you don't trust, you then have to question that a bit more. And I think that's the culture that we've now got. So everything that goes on in Westminster, I think the public tends to look with a bit of a critical eye, whether it's the right thing for them or not. Does that make sense to you? Or?
Yes, I think people have lost trust. We're just going through all that catalogue of behavioural issues, then I think people have just become weary of hearing about politicians and about politics. And trust has definitely been eroded. I have no question about that. Equally, I do feel it is a different question on local constituency matters. Nobody has ever raised that issue with me about my behaviour or anything like that. Then, right across the political divide, when I go knocking on doors, people say, I get what you're about, okay, may agree with you, I may not agree with you, but I know you're working on behalf of this area. But generally, I think there is a problem with trust, and it is up to politicians who have lost trust to work harder to rebuild it. And the betting scandal is just a further example of that.
Just moving on now to kind of the local scene then and your own campaigning. There's lots of polls and they're showing lots of variations in outcome. But I think there's a strong thought overall that Labour will take the government and potentially could take a large majority. And I think it's sort of acknowledged that whether it's a sort of central government or as a local council, it doesn't create a good dynamic to have a strong majority of one party. Harrogate, for instance, it sort of traditionally always had a balance of Conservative and Lib Dems, and that created probably a good outcome. I think it created a question and a challenge, didn't it, for each party?
Yes, I think it's a really interesting point. I think that the national opinion polls, which have not moved now for quite a considerable period, it does look like we are going to see a Labour government. That looks pretty baked in, unless the opinion polls are consistently wrong, and the most wrong they have ever been in polling history. So I think we should expect that is a likely outcome. I might not agree with it, I might not look forward to it, but I think it's something we should expect. The scale of the majority is a different question, and I think generally I didn't really understand why big majorities are a problem until I saw this last Parliament. Intellectually you can understand it, but operationally when you actually see it, there was a large Conservative majority at the start of the 2019 Parliament, and it doesn't do anybody any good service. Basically, when you can see one party states, whether it is Labour in Wales or the SNP in Scotland, something happens that makes the parties look a little bit more inward than outward. And I think it is generally having a good contest improves politics. Having enough people to make an effective opposition asking challenging questions, not opposition for opposition's sake, because quite frankly that's silly. But if you agree on something, why not just say so and then work together to make it better? The thing is to ask good, challenging questions and have a slightly different perspective. You get better policy from that.
And I think we've seen that on the local area committee. And I think there could be better debate. You know, when we look at big issues locally, like the Gateway project, I think that could have been debated in a much more effective way, where it seemed to have sort of stalled a bit, and then there was a challenge, and then there was another challenge, it seemed. So that didn't seem to function, if you like, for the public. When there was a big issue or a big scheme like the Gateway coming in, that didn't seem to sort of function as it sort of should have done for the people.
Well, I think that the Gateway is an interesting one because they actually had a number of consultations, and they've been through quite a number of iterations of what the scheme looks like. But I think actually it highlights a slightly broader question, which is that we haven't yet worked out how to do proper, devolved, area-based decision-making in our council. And then that leads into the debate about whether or not we should have a town council for Harrogate. I'm generally in principle in favour of making decisions as close as possible to a point where they are delivered. You will get a better, more tailored policy decision, therefore more likely to be successful. However, at the same point, we don't need to create a talking shop. The correct answer to lots of problems is not to create more councils. So what is it going to do? I think, so take the principle that devolution is right, but then work out what's going to be devolved. Let's make that work better, but we need to do a little bit more thinking and planning. How is it going to relate to the area committee? How is the area committee going to work with both the council and now our elected mayor for York and North Yorkshire? So just creating a public body, saying, oh, I'll have £50 in council tax from you, please. What's it for? Oh, I don't know yet. That isn't a very good answer, really. So do the thinking and then get it right.
And looking at the election that we've got coming up, in Harrogate we've got, if you like, a full choice, you know, of all the main parties and an independent.
2 independents.
Oh yeah, 2 independents, sorry.
Yeah.
And I know there's been talk about sort of tactical voting, and you use the term being a champion, don't you, for the town. Can you explain what you mean by being a town, well, for the area, I suppose, isn't it?
Yes, it's for the constituency as a whole. It's taking every opportunity to speak up for it and get stuff done for it. And that is what I set out to do when I started in 2010. I pledged that would be my objective, and that's what I've sought to do throughout. So it means basically taking the opportunity to speak up at every possible level. It could be at a local level, where you're dealing with a local council, but more likely and more significantly, it's when you're dealing at a national level. So what does that mean in practical terms? It means working with local bodies such as the hospital, such as the rail companies, to improve the services that we've got. And what does that look like in examples? The capital bid for the 2 new operating theatres and the crumbly concrete removal at the hospital, or the replacement of the old Placer trains, or the arrival of the new London services, the direct services, or the arrival of the electric buses. We will be the cleanest bus town in our nation as this fleet comes into service this summertime. So all of these things where you make a difference, that is what being a local champion is about.
Do you think there's a different approach that MPs make, or possibly from their parties, in terms of how they view the role of being a Member of Parliament, whether they sort of view it as more local or more Westminster, London centric?
Well, I think it's hard to say by party, but I can certainly comment a little bit by individual. In my role, I view it as a mixture of local and national. I think MPs should be a local champion, and that's what I've always sought to be. I was described in the Times as a vigorous local champion some years ago, and I might dig that quote out and reuse it. But you are also a national figure in the sense that you attend our national parliament. You are making decisions which affect our country, and indeed our country's relations with many other countries around the world. So it's both. And for me, it is about having a good local anchor in a constituency. This is my home, this is my community. This isn't about travelling around, finding a seat somewhere. The whole thing is about becoming an MP, and it doesn't matter where. I've never fought anywhere other than here. I remember going into Conservative Central Office shortly after the 97 election, saying, I'd like to become a candidate, please. And they said, where? And I said, I'd like to become a candidate in Harrogate. They said, why? Because that's my home area. Simple as that. It's always been my focus. And I think that is something which I think people have seen in my work as an MP, and I hope it has charmed with them. I think it has.
And just to finish up then, because we've talked for quite a while, I like to ask a question that's frowned upon by interviewers and journalists.
Right.
What should have asked you in this interview? Is there anything that you feel I should have asked or you'd like to talk about, just to finish up?
Well, interesting, because we've covered quite a bit of ground here, and I think that actually one thing that this hasn't really happened in this election is a debate about foreign policy. We are at the most insecure time for at least 2 generations in global security, with an aggressive, acquisitive Russia, same with China, North Korea and Iran. They're all linking up as well. So that presents even greater challenges to us. So this is a moment of international insecurity, and what's happening with some of our most important allies, France and America. You look at what's happening within their own political systems and you think, well, how reliable will these allies be? It is critical that we invest more in defence. I was very pleased to see the defence pledge. We're now at 2% of GDP into NATO. We're looking to increase that to 2.5% and to do so by the end of the next Parliament. That isn't a pledge matched by the other parties. But I think it is really important that we do invest in defence, not just the budgets, but also bring more people into it, make sure our alliances work. The alliance we're seeing, the AUKUS alliance, which is Australia and America, or the alliance we've seen with Italy and Japan. We had the Japanese emperor over here only a few days ago. These are important alliances. We need to see more NATO, more alliances, more defence spending, and show that we are vigorous in defence of our values and our trade.
And is it possible then that hasn't had the attention because everyone, or the general public I suppose, is focused on cost of living? There's an awful lot of news about immigration, so it's sort of been a bit, the narrative, if you like, is sort of led down a certain path at the moment. So it hasn't really had that sort of profile, has it, in the news, it seems?
Well, it hasn't had the profile of other issues, but I think security really does matter. I think security of our nation is the number one objective, number one responsibility of any government. So I think it's a bit of a shame, actually, that we haven't been able to explore this a little further in this election.
Andrew Jones, thank you very much.
Thank you.